Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, Katan, a lot of our stories this evening, we're going to focus in the Middle East, including one of the main articles we're going to talk about is the effectiveness of the U.S. and Israel strikes on the Iranian nuclear facility. Some are questioning what President Donald Trump said about the sites obliterated, and some are saying, is that really what took place? So, but first we're going to start off with on Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, addressed the humanitarian crisis taking place in the Gaza Strip due to Israel's relentless decisions. Now, even though there has been a very small amount of aid that has gotten through, Guterres says, quote, "A trickle of aid is not enough. The trickle must become an ocean." So let's take a listen to what else the Secretary General had to say.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is addressing the recent events in the Middle East. Let's have a listen.
Israeli military operations have created a humanitarian crisis of horrific proportions, more dire today than at any point in this long and brutal crisis. Families have been displaced again and again, and are now confined to less than 1/5 of Gaza's land. And even these shrinking spaces are under threat. Bombs are falling on tents, on families, on those with nowhere left to run. And people are being killed simply trying to feed themselves and their families. The search for food must never be a death sentence. Let me be clear. Israel, as the occupying power, is required by international law to agree to and to facilitate humanitarian relief. Meanwhile, humanitarian operations continue to be strangled. For over 3 months, shelter materials and fuel for critical services have been blocked. Doctors are forced to choose who gets the last vial of medicine or the last ventilator. Aid workers themselves are starving. This cannot be normalized. A handful of medical supplies finally crossed into Gaza earlier this week, the first from the UN in months. But this only underscores the vast scale of the crisis. A trickle of aid is not enough. What is needed now is a surge. The trickle must become an ocean. We need concrete action so aid can reach all people swiftly at scale wherever they are. Any operation that channels desperate civilians into militarized zones is inherently unsafe. It's killing people. It's time for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and full, safe, and sustained humanitarian access. The problem of the distribution of humanitarian aid must be solved. There is no need to reinvent the wheel with dangerous schemes. We have the solution. A detailed plan grounded in the humanitarian principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. We have the supplies, we have the experience. Our plan is guided by what people need. It is built on the trust of communities, donors, and member states. And it worked during the last ceasefire, so it must be allowed to work again. To those in power, I say, enable our operations as international humanitarian law demands. To those with influence, I say, use it. To all member states, I say, uphold the UN Charter you recommitted to just yesterday for the 80th anniversary. Let us bring in life-saving supplies. Let us reach people where they are. And let us recognize that the solution to this problem is ultimately political. The only sustainable path to reestablishing hope is by paving the way to the two-state solution. Diplomacy and human dignity for all must prevail. Thank you.
Well, those are, great words of motivation. Of course, if everyone will get on board and get in line with moves that will bring about a unification internationally and peace, we can start seeing a lot of these humanitarian crises pretty much go away.
Right, and Antonio really lays it out there, Katan, by saying how the people in Gaza, they are now in like a fifth of the territory that they used to be in. Mm-hmm. So now they're so crammed tight in there and trying to get to the food. But of course, they're kind of being killed as they're trying to get food supplies. So really a rough situation, but he does a great job calling on the United Nations to step in there and help the situation, because the Palestinians are greatly suffering.
Right, and really from an international standpoint, if a nation or a group of nations wanted to stop another nation from doing harm to another nation, they would do it. They've done it in the past, they could do it now.
Right.
Well, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement which is making some wonder if Israel and the Palestinians are getting closer to peace. This next video explains that is not likely the case. Please pay close attention.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has released a statement signaling there could be an agreement encompassing Gaza. It reads, "This victory presents an opportunity for a dramatic widening of peace agreements. We're working on this with enthusiasm. Besides the freeing of hostages and defeat of Hamas, there is a window of opportunity here that we must not miss for even one day." All right, let's go to Noor Odo's in Jordan's capital, Amman. She's there because the Israeli government's banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank. Noor, when Netanyahu talks of windows of opportunity for peace, is he talking about Iran and Gaza?
He's talking about everything else but those two, Niamh. Benjamin Netanyahu is, according to many leaks that are carefully calibrated in Israeli media about what's cooking behind the scenes, the talk is about normalization deals with countries in the region, something bigger, something more grandiose, something that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu can claim as a win while sidestepping the issue of Gaza, of Palestine in general. And when it comes to Gaza, according to some reports, we're talking about a ceasefire, about an end to Hamas rule, perhaps even Arab participation in ruling over Gaza, but certainly ending the idea of Palestinian statehood. And that would serve Netanyahu's domestic purposes, because already we've heard commentary from the Israeli Minister of Finance, who said that if in exchange for making peace or normalizing relations with Arab countries, Israel would have to accept a Palestinian state, the minister doesn't think that that's worth it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, about what is driving these comments, but I think you've touched upon it there, that perhaps the United States is dangling in front of Israel the prospects of normalizing relations with Saudi and others, the so-called Abraham Accords. I wonder then how the suggestion from Donald Trump calling for an immediate end to Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial fits into all of this. I mean, how is the prospect of that going down in Israel?
Well, I mean, it fits perfectly, but it's not going down very well, because this is direct interference, if you will, in a judicial process. But there have been some talk, some chatter about perhaps some back-channel negotiations about finding a deal that would end these trials. Let's remember, Niamh, this is a very polarizing issue. Benjamin Netanyahu himself is a very personal, polarizing figure in Israeli politics. He's wildly popular in right-wing circles, but that doesn't mean that all Israelis want to put up with more years of his rule. But he has been able to achieve things most Israelis believe are important, namely attacking Iran, capitalizing on all of that, moving forward with something bigger than Gaza itself, than the continued genocide in Gaza, talking about the release of captives, but in the context of something that would put Israel in a completely different map in the region. That Netanyahu can perhaps sell to his base.
Katan, it sounds as if Israel is willing to make peace with some of the nations around them, but not Iran and some of these ones that are have always been bitter enemies to Israel.
Kind of wonder, where does the forgiveness ever come in?
Well, while the initial words of the United States President Donald Trump were very confident that the airstrikes on the 3 nuclear facilities in Iran had been extremely successful, a Pentagon report, which is an assessment of the aftermath, says it is possible that the strikes have only slowed down Iran's nuclear program.
Well, what is suggested is that the strikes have knocked out water and electricity and caved in entrances to the underground sites, which would only be set back Iran's nuclear program a few months. However, Israel's office of the Prime Minister says the combined efforts of Israel and the U.S. bombing raids has set back Iran's nuclear program for years, and it will not recover.
However, the Defense Intelligence Agency did release a statement saying the report is simply, quote, preliminary and a low confidence assessment and not a final conclusion to the matter. Now, the physical sites have not been able to be viewed by those outside Iran, so no concrete conclusions can be drawn at this time.
Well, U.S. senators were briefed at the Capitol on classified information concerning the military strikes on Iran. While they didn't share any of the classified information with reporters afterward, their comments were clearly for or against President Trump's assessment. For example, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy told reporters the president was deliberately misleading the public when he said the program was, quote unquote, obliterated. It is certain that there is still significant capability and significant equipment that remain.
Well, on the flip side, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham defended President Trump, stating, obliterated is a good word for me to use. I can tell the people in South Carolina nobody's going to work in these 3 sites anytime soon. So quite a bit of a difference there as to how successful or unsuccessful these strikes really were on accomplishing what Israel and the U.S. wanted to, is to knock out these nuclear facilities.
Yeah, and it kind of makes you wonder how the information is presented or how it's perceived that you'll get such differing opinions on what was accomplished in that area.
Right, but it's, as they said, until they can really examine the sites to see, I mean, with them being buried in the ground, they can't really tell whether or not it was successful.
That's right. Well, our next video presents U.S. Secretary of Defense addressing President Trump's accomplishments regarding NATO members' contributions. Well, you'll also hear in the video also from a U.S. General and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff give a briefing for the recent U.S. Operation Rising Hammer. Let's take a listen.
Where there was a historic outcome. I want to start with that real quick. I think there's so much news, so many things happening that oftentimes big, momentous moments get missed. What President Trump accomplished in NATO yesterday was game-changing and historic. A shift in burden sharing to European responsibility in NATO that most would have said was impossible at the beginning of his term. But he said NATO needs to pay up. They started in the first term, and here in his second term, we've accelerated that. 32 NATO countries committed to spending 5% of their GDP on defense, on actually investing in the NATO alliance. So I hope with all the ink spilled, all of your outlets find the time to properly recognize this historic change in continental security that other presidents tried to do, other presidents talked about. President Trump accomplished it. It's a huge deal.
First, on Monday, as the president has stated, on Monday morning, we began to receive indications and warnings that Iran intended to attack U.S. bases in the region. That morning, building on the work that CENTCOM Commander Eric Kurilla had done, and on the orders of the President, at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar and around the region, we assumed a minimum force posture. Most folks had moved off the base to extend the security perimeter out away from what we assessed might be a target zone, except for a very few Army soldiers at Al Udeid. At that point, only 2 Patriot batteries remained on base, roughly 44 American soldiers responsible for defending the entire base, to include CENTCOM's forward headquarters in the Middle East, an entire air base, and all the U.S. forces there. The oldest soldier was a 28-year-old captain. The youngest was a 21-year-old private who'd been in the military for less than 2 years. So let's put ourselves out there for a second. Imagine you're that young first lieutenant, you're 25 or 26 years old, and you've been assigned as the tactical director inside the command and control element. You, at that age, are the sole person responsible to defend this base. Listening next to you is your early warning operator whose job is to notify you of imminent attack. There's 5 people inside a vehicle and 5 people outside of a vehicle around these, a total of, as I said, 44. By the way, you've sat in the Middle East for years, deployed over and over again, extended multiple times, always being prepared, but unsure of when that particular day will come that you must execute your mission and not fail at doing it. Let me next move to a walkthrough of the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapon and share a little bit about the planners who did this and their work on the weapon. First, let me set the stage for you. There's an organization in the U.S. called the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA. DTRA does a lot of things for our nation, but DTRA is the world's leading expert on deeply buried underground targets. In 2009, a Defense Threat Reduction Agency officer was brought into a vault at an undisclosed location and briefed on something going on in Iran. For security purposes, I'm not going to share his name. He was shown some photos and some highly classified intelligence of what looked like a major construction project in the mountains of Iran. He was tasked to study this facility, work with the intelligence community to understand it, and he was soon joined by an additional teammate. For more than 15 years, this officer and his teammate lived and breathed this single target, Fordo, a critical element of Iran's covert nuclear weapons program. He studied the geology. He watched the Iranians dig it out. He watched the construction, the weather, the discard material, the geology, the construction materials, where the materials came from. He looked at the vent shaft, the exhaust shaft, the electrical systems, the environmental control systems, every nook, every crater, every piece of equipment going in and every piece of equipment going out. They literally dreamed about this target at night when they slept. They thought about it driving back and forth to work, and they knew from the very first days what this was for. You do not build a multi-layered underground bunker complex with centrifuges and other equipment in a mountain for any peaceful purpose. And along the way, they realized we did not have a weapon that could adequately strike and kill this target. So they began a journey to work with industry and other tacticians to develop the GBU-57. They tested it over and over again, tried different options, tried more after that. They accomplished hundreds of test shots and dropped many full-scale weapons against extremely realistic targets for a single purpose: kill this target at the time and place of our nation's choosing. Kill this target at the time and place of our nation's choosing. And then, on a day in June of 2025, more than 15 years after they started their life's work, the phone rang and the President of the United States ordered the B-2 force that you've supported to go strike and kill this target.
Katan, you can see just how much training and preliminary work goes into, targeting these areas in Iran. They've been studying it for over 15 years, knowing that the day would come when, they would get a call saying, we're going to strike this site. So they gathered all the data they could that whole time and figured out a way and have a way, even if that meant developing a particular bomb, to be able to take out that site.
Right, because they didn't have it at that time, considering the fact that they understood that Iran, and many places do that, had bunkers deep in the earth with reinforced concrete and so forth, and they just knew what they were looking at, but how to get to them, that was the big question.
Well, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, spoke in an interview with Face the Nation regarding missing uranium that Iran said was moved before the U.S. strikes. Grossi's team is in Iran inspecting the sites for confirmation. Now, he said the IAEA doesn't know if the material was moved or if part of it was under the facility during the attacks from Israel and the U.S. Now, he said some could have been destroyed during the attack and some could have been moved.
Well, President Donald Trump recently attended a NATO summit, and there he warned that the war between Iran and Israel might reignite and might do so soon. He brought this forward at the end of that summit, and that summit, of course, at NATO was held at The Hague, where he also persuaded NATO members to increase their contribution. Now, this was something that he did during his first presidency, but of course they agreed to increase their contribution to 5% of their GDP by 2035. Now, the current ceasefire, he also said, regarding ceasefire between Israel and Iran, might not hold, according to the president, and it could start again. Trump said an indicator of that was when Iran fired missiles not very long after the ceasefire began, which, of course, Israel responded by sending over 50-something fighters to deal with it. But, of course, President Trump said he intervened, calling Israel and telling them to call the fighters back, which, according to him, they actually did.
Well, he also stated that the U.S. is planning to meet with Iranian leaders soon to begin negotiations, but also said that an agreement might not be necessary to be signed, saying, I don't care if we have an agreement or not. The only thing that we're asking for is the same thing we've asked for before, and that's no nuclear.
And of course, that was really kind of the backing of the U.S.'s decision to assist Israel, which at first they said they didn't have anything to do with it. But of course, then they showed their support for Israel by, of course, President Trump initially congratulating Benjamin Netanyahu for his work, but then also bringing that rising hammer operation and using those bunker busters to hit those 3 facilities.
Right, and remember, President Donald Trump really gave Iran a timeline that they said, we need a decision, but it was really shortly after that the U.S. went in and attacked. So, Iran, they kind of had their minds made up. The United States had their mind made up. Look, it's no nuclear, that's it. If you're going to develop it, we're going to attack.
That's right. That's right. Well, if you'd like to learn more about nuclear war and its unfolding in this time period and what you can do to protect yourself and your family, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you contact the House of Yahweh, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas, 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them by going to any of their websites. You can go to yahweh.com, YeshuaHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. For any email, if you'd like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, go ahead, you can call the number on your screen now. And once again, if you haven't already, don't forget to check out the Yisrael Says program by going to YisraelSays.com and the Ask Yisrael program by going to AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere, because up next is another classic sermon by Israel Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thanks for watching.